All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If I could ask the chambers to please come to order. And again, if the chambers could please come to order. Thank you so much. We had agreed to start tonight's meeting at 6 o'clock. Want to be respectful of your time. Start as close to 6 promptly as we possibly can. Good evening. I'm Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simitian. I have the privilege of serving as the representative for the 5th Supervisorial District, a designation which means almost nothing to almost everybody. So in plain English, what that means is that I represent the northwestern portion of Santa Clara County, about 400,000 people in the northwestern part of the county, and that includes Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, Cupertino, Saratoga, portions of Sunnyvale, and portions of San Jose. And I hope I didn't leave anybody in my district out. Unincorporated areas, which, not coincidentally, includes 4,000 acres of unincorporated Stanford lands in the unincorporated community. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to provide one last opportunity for people to attend a public hearing and make comments on the draft environmental impact report, which was issued some months ago. There was a 60-day comment period, only feels like 60 months, a 60-day comment period. That has been extended by an additional 60 days. So I should just mention right up front that there is a deadline now of 5 p.m. on Friday, February the 2nd, and I'm looking to the staff to correct me if I happen to misspeak. Friday, 5 p.m., February the 2nd. That'll be the last opportunity for written comments on the draft environmental impact report. This, however, is an opportunity for folks who not only want to submit written comments, but also to simply come and make comments at the microphone. We're doing it here close to the property in question as a matter of convenience to local residents. Thank you all for being here. Your comments tonight will be recorded, and I should mention that we have a court reporter who is here, who's going to take every word down, plus we will record the comments, and your comments tonight will be considered formal comments on the draft EIR. That means that your comments will be included in the environmental document, the final EIR, with a response back to any comments that you make. And that is the value of having you here tonight. It is so much more helpful to hear from folks early on in the process rather than at the 12th hour when it can be tougher, frankly, to incorporate your good thinking. So thank you again for being here. A couple of quick announcements as people file in and take their places. I should mention there is a sign-in sheet on the back table. Candace Joy, if you would raise your hand. Candace? Would you raise your hand? There you go. That's all right. Candace is in the back by the sign-in sheet, and if you would like to be kept informed, if you sign in on the contact sheet there, we will add you to the interested parties list for both the planning department and my office, and going forward, you will receive updates about the project. If you would like to speak, then we ask that you fill out a speaker card. It looks something like this, and give it to one of my staff people, and you will recognize them because they're going to walk forward. So Gabe, would you walk forward, please? Gabe, would you walk forward, please, to the center aisle over here? And then also Christina Loquist, who is here from my office, and Antonia Zavala. Where are you, Antonia? Antonia is helping somebody, but we're going to pull her into the mix as well. And if you see any one of these three people wandering up and down the aisles, you should hand them a comment card or simply do it in the rear of the chambers. We will call on you then. A couple of you have asked about how we pick folks who are going to be called in terms of comment cards. It's my custom and practice to do it randomly. And I know for some of you that'll be just great, and others will say, oh, but I wanted to be first. And others will say, no, but I wanted the last word. And others will say, oh, but I had a series of 3 speakers planned. I'm sorry, just to keep folks from gaming the system, I just shuffle the deck and call them randomly, and that means everybody gets treated much the same way. There is information in the rear of the chambers that will give you additional information on how to submit those written comments, again, before the February 2nd deadline. And as I mentioned earlier, tonight's meeting is being taped. It's also being broadcast live. And I want to introduce a few folks who are here with us tonight. And again, if we can ask folks in the rear of the chambers to be just a little bit quieter. Have haven't done that in years. Thank you. That was great. If we could ask folks in the back to try and keep it a little bit quieter. With us tonight, Kirk Gerard, who is the Director of Planning. Where are you, Kirk? Right here in front of me. Thank you very much. We also have Liz Ann Reynolds, who's from our County Counsel's office. We have Deputy County Executive Sylvia Gallegos, who I think is on her way if she has not yet had a chance to arrive. Kavita Kumar, who is the project planner, and we have consultants who are here, and let me ask them to lean forward and introduce themselves. But before we do that, David Rader, also from our planning department. David, where are you? And raising your hand right there. Thank you, right by my side. And our consultants are? Paul?
Paul Mitchell from Environmental Science Associates.
And Paul, what do you consult on for everybody here who doesn't know that?
Our firm prepared the environmental impact report for the proposed project.
Thank you. And also with us tonight are?
I'm Brian Boxer, also with the ESA.
Okay. These folks are here on sort of emergency standby in case we need them, but tonight is primarily designed for comment by members of the public, as I said, to be part of the EIR process. I should mention that, and there may be others here, and my apologies if I just haven't spotted you, but I do see our local Vice Mayor, Eric Filseth, who's here. Vice Mayor Filseth, thank you for joining us tonight, in addition to the many other meetings that I know you attend on a regular basis. And again, I want to thank all of you for participating. It really has been helpful to have your early comments, and that ensures that they will be responded to as part of the final EIR, which will be prepared in the coming months. All right, then let's ask Kavita Kumar or Kirk Gerard, who's going to give us an initial presentation. Ms. Kumar, go right ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and I'll give you a very short presentation and leave the rest of the time for you all to make your comments, which we are here to listen and take note. So, supposed to move.
Bear with us as we make the technology work.
Yep.
All right. Ms. Kumar, what do we have on the screen?
Just give me one moment. I think I advanced too far. Okay, sorry about that. So here's a short meeting agenda. I'm going to talk about the purpose of the meeting, the proposed project that Stanford has submitted to the County of Santa Clara, which we are referring to as the General Use Permit 2018. The draft environmental impact report, and finally, I will go over the public review and input process to make sure that everybody has that information. This map here shows all the lands owned by Stanford in the area, and what is shown in green is the portion of Stanford lands that is within the unincorporated Santa Clara County, and the general use permit that they have applied for, which is in front of the county, is that portion which is in the green. And the proposed development for 2018 GUP, the request from Stanford is to add another 2.275 million net new square feet of academic and academic support uses, an additional 3,150 new on-campus housing units or beds, 40,000 new net square feet of childcare centers and facilities. And this project has a lifetime horizon of 17 years, starting from when it's approved and goes through 2035. And also, I would like to note that there is no development proposed in the foothills or the San Juan Development District, which is where the faculty housing is located. This graphic gives an idea of what is already existing on Stanford, and that is in the dark brown tan. That is the amount of square feet, million square feet that's existing on Stanford. And the 2.03 million square feet, which is in the orange, which was part of the 2000 GUP that was approved in 2000. And the yellow bar is what is proposed, the 2.275 2.5 million square feet that's being requested by Stanford for the next phase of development. And similarly, the bar in the bottom shows the number of student beds and faculty and staff units. The first part shows what's already on campus, the 12,219 units. And currently, under the current GUP, in the 2000 GUP, Stanford has allocated 4,468 units, which they're almost built out. And they are requesting another 3,150 units or beds in the next phase of development. The draft environmental report has been available to us since October 6th, when it was made available to the public. And that report is, in effect, has detailed information on the effects of the proposed project on the environment, in ways in which the significant effects can be mitigated, and it also has alternatives to the proposed project that could reduce or eliminate any significant impacts of the project. This is a very brief overview of the EIR process itself. In January, the notice of preparation was, January 2017, the notice of preparation was sent, and then the draft EIR was available to the public in October 2017. And we are currently in the 120-day public review process, which ends on February 2nd, 2018, as was mentioned before. And once we have the final EIR done, sometime around late spring in 2018, the findings and the notice of determination will be in fall of 2018, where there'll be more public hearings, public notice, and public hearings when the county will take action on the proposed project. The draft EIR has been available on the county website, and is still currently available at this website, and it's also listed on the information that you may have picked up at the back of the room. It's also available in the local libraries and in in all the city halls and planning offices in the area. How to comment? So there are various ways you can do that. Provide verbal comments today at the meeting, which, as Supervisor Simitian mentioned, is being recorded. You can submit written comments tonight or via email or by sending it by regular mail to the address provided. And all written comments will be accepted until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 2nd, 2018. With that, I will turn it over to Supervisor Simitian to take your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do have a number of cards. As I mentioned, we're going to take them randomly. Each speaker is invited to speak for up to 3 minutes. The microphone is right here. I know a number of you are regulars here. We are going to hit the toggle switch when the time comes. You'll get a warning light when your time is starting to wrap up. And I should also have mentioned that we're going to give the applicant, Stanford University, 5 minutes max at the end of the meeting to correct any material mistakes that they feel have been made during the course of the conversation. Again, that's for correction purposes only, not for advocacy purposes tonight, because the goal is to get comments on the record. And I think I saw Council Member Karen Holman somewhere in the room who's walked in. Thank you, Council Member. Appreciate you joining us as well. All right, so let me look to my capable staff. Ms. Loquist, anything else that I should be sharing with the public here before we I think we're good to go. I do notice that there are some folks who have noisemakers, and I'm just going to ask you to do me a favor. Rather than applaud or use the noisemakers following individual speakers, my experience is that that can make it a little intimidating for folks who are shy about coming up to the microphone. And even in my district, I have people who are shy about coming up to the microphone. So what I'm going to ask you to do is hold off on that, if you would, out of respect to sort of creating a safe space where people, no matter what their point of view, can feel comfortable being heard. It's a little less intimidating, I think, if we just give everybody that courtesy. All right, our first speaker is going to be Edith Eddy, to be followed by Stephen Rosenblum and Julianne Frizzell. Come on up to the microphone. And again, if you can line up a little bit, at least be ready on the aisle. Stephen Rosenblum will be next, and then Julianne Frizzell. Ms. Eddy, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. My name is Edith Eddy. I live at 2579 Cowper Street in Palo Alto. I've lived there for 45 years. My remarks will be very brief this evening. I'm here because I want to draw attention to a part of an article that was printed in the Palo Alto Weekly on December 1st. And in it, it's by Gennady Shire. And in it, in the next to last paragraph, he refers to some comments made by Mr. Poulter representing Stanford University, specifically that Mr. Poulter noted that of the 80 environmental impacts that the report looked at, a total of 76 were deemed less than significant. Of the remaining 4, 2 of them, acknowledged by Stanford University, were deemed not just significant, but unavoidable. Those 2 were additional traffic on roadways and additional traffic at intersections. So those were considered by the university significant and unavoidable. I want to encourage attention to be paid to what it means to say that those things are unavoidable, and I urge you to pay attention to exactly how severe they will be. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Stephen Rosenblum to be followed by Julianne Frizzell. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Simitian, for organizing this session. Really appreciate the chance to speak to you directly. Ever since high-speed rail decided to route itself through Palo Alto on the Caltrain tracks, I've been extremely interested in the issue of grade separation. As we all know, even with the increasing Caltrain service, the 4 grade level crossings in Palo Alto are not only dangerous, create a lot of noise, but also are a severe impediment to traffic. With Stanford suggesting that they're going to bring almost 10,000 new people into the Palo Alto area as a result of this general use plan, I think it's incumbent on Stanford to make a significant contribution to grade separation. It's an extremely important issue from the point of view of traffic. A lot of Stanford people use Caltrain to get to Stanford, and a lot of us have to cross the tracks, and a lot of Stanford people have to cross the tracks if they're coming from 101. There's going to be an unavoidable amount of traffic that's going to be increased. And if there are grade separations, then there will no longer be barriers to the streets at Charleston, Meadow, Churchill, and Alma, the crossing near downtown. So I think as part of this general use plan, I think Stanford should be asked to make a contribution to grade separations for Caltrain. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. That takes us to Julianne Frizzell, and she will then be followed by I believe it's Richard Mates, Jeff Brown, and Gabby Badika. Ms. Frizzell, welcome.
Thank you. Julianne Frizzell, 1175 Channing Avenue, Palo Alto. And I have lived in the Palo Alto area since the early 1970s, and first in Menlo Park, and for the last 22 years in Palo Alto. And I am especially concerned with what appears to me to be massive growth, seemingly without end, on the Stanford campus. The infrastructure and environment of our area cannot handle this growth. I believe it's unsustainable. We in Palo Alto, Menlo Park area, already experience too many of the negative impacts of Stanford's growth. I'm in agreement with the ideas that Peter Dreckmeyer has put forth, and the following are a few of the requests that I would like to see incorporated into the Stanford GUP. First is a maximum build-out plan, and I'm not going to go into the details. Other people can do that. And secondly, permanent protection of the foothills. Third, creation of at least as many housing units as increase in campus daytime population. And fourth, greater transportation demand management measures. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here. That brings us to Richard Mates, Jeff Brown, and Gabby Badika, and I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly.
Good evening. I'm Richard Mates. I've lived in Palo Alto most of my life. I even had a fine gentleman by the name of Simitian for a high school English teacher once upon a time.
For the record, that was not me. Go right ahead.
It was your dad.
Thank you.
I happen to live in the neighborhood that is in Palo Alto that is being unfortunately called the neighborhood of Carmageddon. We have situations regularly now where I and my neighbors can't even back out of our driveways for hours a day. It's terrible. Stanford had no part in that. The leadership in Palo Alto I would place blame with rather than Stanford. However, Stanford in a real way contributes to that problem. And I believe that they should do whatever they want on their campus, but I don't think that they should impact Palo Alto to the extent that this project will. And that is to say that they will add a lot of traffic to the traffic currently going through Stanford. My solution that I suggest is that even though the presentation said that they're not looking to the foothills, they have more than enough land in the foothills to build parking facilities and transportation to the center of the campus, whether it's a light rail or buses or monorail, whatever it is. I suggest that the traffic be vectored to the off at 280 and make it their problem and leave Palo Alto out of the loop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff Brown to be followed by Gabby Badika. Mr. Brown?
It happens.
Okay. And just so you know, we have a system here. We're going to go with the Jeff Brown who got to the microphone first. That's how we're going to handle that, all right? Oh, thank you.
That's a good one. Okay, so hopefully this won't, it's telling me to sum up already, so can I start over?
We're going to start you all over again. Thank you.
Thank you. There you go for having a unique name. First thing I want to do is ask us all to separate the concept of Stanford, the educational institution, from Stanford, the land management corporation. Second thing I'd like us to do is separate the idea of development and construction, because what we're talking about is construction, and construction comes with huge costs, both to the environment at large and to resources locally. And you will never see in an environmental impact report the statement that this project will make your area unlivable. And that's because the same as with the correlation between global warming and individual hurricanes, you can't draw a one-to-one correlation. But I have lived in this town for 34 years, and for the past 25 years, there has been incessant construction on that campus. And there has also been a lot of construction in this city. And the city has become, by what I consider to be reasonable standards, unlivable. When you can't back out of your driveway, when you can't see the foothills when you turn to look at them because they're covered in smog and whatever, that's a situation where it's no longer the community that you bought into. And so I feel like a little bit addressing point by point an EIR on this particular issue, where construction has been going on for this length of time, massive construction, is a little bit like not seeing the forest for the trees. The trees are the items in the EIR. The forest is that the area not is becoming or is threatened to become, but has become unlivable. And I would like people to consider that. It is amazing to me that we are asking how much more can Stanford build in the year that we've just had with the hurricanes and the fires and the smoke. People having to wear respiratory aids to go outside because of the fires in Sonoma and the fire and mudslide down south in December. What are we thinking? I don't know what we're thinking anymore. So the question I want to ask is, what in the world are we thinking? Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Gabby Badika? It's all right. How'd I do on the pronunciation?
Perfect, A+, and I'm a languages teacher at Stanford. Okay, so I'm a grad student at Stanford, and I teach languages as well. Thank you for having this community meeting tonight. Many important issues have been brought up, and many more will be as we move forward in the night, and I'm here to speak on one that doesn't get brought up that much, which is the grad student perspective, and that's probably because students are so caught up studying that we don't have time for much of anything else. We come here from all over the world. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, for example, because we want to improve our educational and professional prospects, and those of us who are in grad school because we want to become professors at other universities all over the world. The situation is that we're told you have to be able to get into one of it's a list of 7 elite schools in the States in order to achieve that. And when all of the schools have admission rates similar to Stanford's, it's obviously very hard. For those of us who are lucky enough to get in, attending Stanford and learning from our world expert thesis advisors is a wonderful, life-changing thing. And I would like more students to have this opportunity. So my comment tonight is in favor of the grad student spots Stanford wants to make, and the GUP is how we get those grad student spots through academic research buildings and dorms for us to live in. I was also happy to see that along with the academic space, they're building enough spaces for grad students to live on campus if they want to do so. Right now, with the EVGR, the Graduate Residences Project, the idea is to bring students back to campus and away from everybody else's way, basically, which I think is also good. I think Stanford using its own land to house and educate grad students is something that I commend them for. Many other universities just say, sorry, the housing list is full, you're on your own to go out into wherever you can find a place to live. But Stanford is offering enough housing for all of us. I would also like to support the addition of the new undergrad spaces, because I think for undergraduates, it's not even anymore like luck, can you get in, can you not? I call an admission rate that low a lottery. And so many of them, as somebody who's one of their language instructors, so many of them are such great students, they go above and beyond. So I'm very much in favor of this small increase for undergraduate students as well, because I do think that having the opportunity that I do to attend Stanford is great, it's life-changing. It really is a wonderful thing that happened to my life. So I want more students to have that, and I hope that we can all work together to also fix all of the other important issues mentioned tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we call the next 3, just a couple of quick items. I think I see Council Member Elizabeth Lewis from Atherton here, do I? Yes, thank you for joining us, Council Member. And then the next thing I want to say is I see folks standing, and if that's by choice, great, but there are still a few more seats. And I'm going to ask my staff to work with City of Palo Alto staff to see if we can pull out a few more chairs so that people can be seated in the back. If you're wondering how to do that, go to the Vice Mayor. He's a very important and powerful man, and he's right here in the 3rd row, okay? He'll help you out there. And then the last thing I should say is people are filing in to take their places. I have mentioned this previously, but this is a decision that will ultimately be made by the County Board of Supervisors. There are 5 supervisors. Of those 5, as I mentioned, I am the one district supervisor. The other 4 supervisors do not represent the affected area, but will all be part of the 5-member board that votes on this issue. So while I am pleased to hear directly from my constituents and near neighbors tonight, as the process continues, you will want to be mindful of the fact that there are 5 supervisors, and ultimately it is a vote of those 5, including 4 who represent other parts of Santa Clara County, who will be voting. So we'll keep looking for a few chairs for those of you who are standing in the back, and I will go to Jeb Eddy, Arthur Keller, and Stephanie Munoz. If you would all come up in that order, please.
My message consists of 2 words. It'll take a lot of work to change the amount of parking.
And Mr. Eddy, I'm going to ask if you would speak into the microphone so we capture all this, please, for the record. Thanks.
I'm holding up a sign that says less parking.
Thank you.
My message consists of 2 words. It will take some really interesting, original thinking to accomplish this, but the effect of reducing the amount of parking that they're asking for will have a very positive cascading effect throughout the city of Palo Alto, throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Keller, welcome.
Thank you. I think you want to reset my time.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. It says sum up.
You have 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting. And I think that Stanford is a great university, and Palo Alto would not exist in its form without Stanford. However, as I mentioned at the last meeting, too much of a great thing is not good. So one of the things about it is that it is important to realize that there are spillover effects. When you basically have a lot of people who are brought on, hired on the Stanford campus, not only does that require housing for the people who are on Stanford, and not all the new people are being housed, and there are a lot of people who are already not being housed that are working there, but those people require additional follow-on workers to support the people who are working on campus. So there's actually an increased need for the housing in there, and I think that part of that issue is to support that and think about what housing Stanford can have on the Stanford campus. The problem, however, is that housing does not come without its own pain. And the consideration is that if you put more housing on, for example, the west side of campus over by Sand Hill Road, where are the students of those of the people being housed there go? There's no elementary school over there, and there already is some housing there that Stanford built without building an elementary school. So we do need Stanford to provide land and pay for the building of a new elementary school on the west side of campus. Also consider that if Stanford puts in housing that is rental housing for employees on campus, there will not be any property tax to pay the school district for the cost of the teachers to educate these students. So you need to think about that issue, because the school district will have increased expenses. We are a basic aid district, and therefore we don't get additional funds for educating the students if we basically have for each additional student to just slice the pie smaller, especially if there's no additional revenue from Stanford to pay for these students. So firstly, in terms of the schools, a site for the school district elementary school. Second, Stanford to pay for it, and then some sort of in lieu fees in terms of this. Now, I realize that this is not a CEQA issue. But the consideration is that it is nonetheless an issue that is available to talk about at the GUP, and it can be talked about at the county because a GUP is like a development agreement. You can negotiate anything you want. So it is within the realm of the city, of the county, to negotiate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And actually, thank you, Mr. Keller, for pointing out that the summing up light has been coming on at the start of people's comments, which I'm guessing is a little bit confusing for them. I think I can master the technology, and we can adjust that so that it will come on when you have 1 minute of your 3 minutes left. So if you see that yellow light on, it should mean that you are 2/3 of the way through your 3 minutes. You have 1 minute left. And then, of course, when the red light comes on, that's the signal that 3 minutes is up. Stephanie Munoz, would you like to come forward? You have up to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Supervisors Simitian and your colleagues. My name is Stephanie Munoz, and I want to address one sentence of Palo Alto's letter on its first page in response to Stanford's proposal for GDP. And the sentence is this: Stanford proposes to create a demand for housing without creating the commensurate housing to fulfill that demand. As far as I'm concerned, that is the one whole thing in the entire GDP that must be addressed. You can't do that. This is part of the movie where I came in. Back in 1959, the Russians put up a satellite, Sputnik, and the United States was much embarrassed not to be the leader anymore. And a very brilliant engineer named Terman at Stanford saw an interesting idea that if you put together Stanford's enormous lands and Stanford's enormous talent, you could have a whole new world. Now, I have nothing against Stanford. My son graduated from Stanford. My grandson graduated from Stanford. My daughter has a master's degree. Hey, my father graduated from Stanford. However, what happened when they started the Stanford Industrial Park was you couldn't get out of your, the towns around were really very much impacted. You couldn't really manage. Palo Alto looked at its general plan, they had one then, and they converted what would have been houses to industrial park. So it was a double whammy, there wasn't any place for people to live, and everything, Los Altos, Cupertinos, even, the people had to come from San Jose to work, and it was a total mess, and that's what we're going to have now. Oh, and they took out the train. The supervisors took out the train. There was a train from the West Valley that was right where they wanted to put an expressway to carry people on rubber-tired transportation to this industrial park. Took out the train. I would implore you, whatever else you do, whatever else you put on that place, schools or no schools, well, it does matter with the schools, because the result of having all the work in one place and the workers' children in a different town means the dreadful imbalance of education in between the wealthy and the poor that led to the Serrano decision. You have got to not let them put in workplaces without houses for the workers. Every single one. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. That takes us to our next three speakers, Doroteo Garcia, Nadia Nayak, and Jose Esanuela. Doroteo?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity to let me speak here. I work at Stanford University like a janitor for 20 years, and I am an East Palo Alto resident. I feel very, very proud to work on this big institution, and I feel very proud how Stanford getting bigger and bigger. Every morning, for go to my work, I rode my bicycle because I saw too many cars, too much traffic in University Avenue. I feel proud how Stanford create more jobs for people. But my question is, where these people can live, like a janitor, like a garden, like cafeteria workers? We need to build affordable housing for these people. Stanford have more land than East Palo Alto. In East Palo Alto, we have a rent control. I think that's we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nadia Nayak, to be followed by Jose Esanuela. Ms. Nayak, welcome.
Good evening. So I have concerns about the Caltrain data that's presented in the GUP. Stanford plans to keep its commitments to no net new trips by relying on its TDM program, and that program relies heavily on Caltrain. But Caltrain is already at capacity. Even under electrification, there will not be enough increase in capacity to address the standard regional growth, much less Stanford's expansion. If Caltrain plays such an integral role in their TDM program, then their mitigations should be transit-focused and not car-focused. Train cars would increase capacity, and grade separations would help with safety and road congestion. Although this project is for the academic campus, it is clear that Stanford uses other land that it has for other academic functions. For example, Stanford at Porter Drive is an area of new buildings in the research park that has been described as, quote, a total of 7 buildings in the Porter Drive vicinity that will be occupied by the School of Medicine and Stanford University administrative units. It also describes that the 3 buildings that the university will occupy include 3160 and 3145 Porter Drive and 1841 Page Mill Road. These buildings house administrative groups that support operations at the main campus, including LBRE, Human Resources, and Purchasing. Why am I telling you this? The university plans to be in those facilities for 5 to 10 years. Now, these are services that are for the university, so they're moving them into the research park. At peak, it's anticipated there will be 1,500 or more Stanford employees occupying the 7 buildings that comprise Porter Drive. Of the 1,500 staff members, 40% are expected to be Stanford University staff, and 60% are School of Medicine staff. It's unfair and unreasonable to expect the county and the public to limit their analysis of the impact of the university's expansion to the area within the cordon of the university, when clearly the university is shuffling functions outside the cordon, but only counting no net new trips within the cordon. The university is also seeking to get credits for the area beyond the cordon when, for example, they use a Marguerite shuttle. So they're parking people off the campus, and so they're not tripping the cordon counter. And then the Marguerite shuttle that picks up all these people also counts as a credit. This practice makes it clear that the Marguerite data is very important, because if we were to put it together with detailed Caltrain ridership data, we can see how many Caltrain riders are Marguerite riders. But we can also see how many Marguerite riders are using satellite parking areas and then coming into the cordon. By offering only total numbers, it's unclear exactly what's going on, much like it's unclear how real estate outside the cordon is being used for the Stanford academic use. In addition, Stanford has included very low job multiplier numbers in their calculations. They've put a multiplier of 0.73 indirect jobs. The Bay Area Council has put out a number of 4.3 for high-tech jobs, and Stanford has made its mission to do technology transfer directly to the area. So they have lots of technological spin-offs. None of the indirect job growth is included in the housing numbers or in the transportation numbers. So when we're looking at the effects, they're trying to limit us very specifically on what's being built, and we're not looking at the impact in the greater area. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Folks, please. Jose Esenuela, to be followed by, I believe it's Neva Yarkin, the other Jeff Brown, and Wynn Firth. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jose Escanuela, and I'm an employee of Stanford University. I've been there for 15 years. I'm also the president of SEIU Local 2007, and we represent about 1,200 of the service employees on the campus. I'm also here on behalf of United Healthcare Workers West, which also represents about 1,400 workers at the Stanford Hospital, and we're also here on behalf of United Service Workers West, which represents about 200 janitors on the Stanford campus and other parts of the university. And we're here, basically, we would like to be a part, and we're fully supportive of the community's needs, especially protecting the environment. That's important. We have a large group of workers who are the premier gardeners of the institution. We take care of all of the resources. And so we definitely want the university to do all it can to protect the foothills, protect all of the open spaces, the arboretum, and everything else, because it's so vital to the valley, especially with all the concerns that everybody's bringing up about the fires and everything else. We want the university, as part of this general use permit, to make a firm commitment to providing affordable housing to its staff on the campus through the below market rate program. We want that for all of the service workers on the campus, not just our members, because everybody is in need of that, and the university can provide that. We also would like the university to make more improvements to the transportation programs, especially the link between East Palo Alto and the university, where we have many of our members and other community members live. There is no real way to get from Stanford to East Palo Alto that is nowadays safe or quick, and I think really looking at that would help address a lot of the problems that the Palo Alto community has. I want to thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for being here. Neva Yarkin, followed by Jeff Brown, and then Wynn Firth. Ms. Yarkin, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Neva Yarkin, and I live at 133 Churchill Avenue in Palo Alto. The dust hasn't settled from Stanford projects not completed since 2016. Their 26 projects are still ongoing. Stanford Middle Plaza, 8.4 acres at the 300 to 500 El Camino, hasn't started yet between Palo Alto and Menlo Park. This will cause significant and unavoidable impact to traffic, which hasn't been addressed. This is not acceptable. Everyone wants a piece of Embarcadero Road in Palo Alto, which is already severely congested. Stanford wants Embarcadero Road because it's the main artery onto campus. Hundreds of cars, buses, small and big trucks travel down Embarcadero Road every day and then travel out the same way. On the weekends with football games and other events at Stanford, Embarcadero is at a standstill. Castellea, a private school, wants to use one lane of Embarcadero as an entrance and exit onto their campus with their expansion increase. The electric train will have 20 trains an hour, all that backup of cars waiting at lights to turn on Churchill Avenue will be pushed onto Embarcadero, Oregon Expressway, and side streets. Who is watching new development on Embarcadero Road? How much more traffic can Embarcadero Road handle? Stanford expansion doesn't make sense for Embarcadero Road and all the increased traffic that will occur. What happens when emergency vehicles rushing to Stanford Hospital, a fire, or police emergency can't get through traffic jams? Stanford hasn't taken into account any of the future developments on infrastructure in the area. If Stanford is allowed to expand, Stanford needs to build new roads, grocery stores, gas stations, schools to accommodate this influx of people. Stanford needs to help pay for the new electric train costs, new road crossings on train tracks, firefighters, etc., that will be benefiting the Stanford community as well as Palo Alto and surrounding cities. Palo Alto and other cities can't and shouldn't carry this burden by ourselves. Like I said before, let the dust settle first before approving new developments at Stanford. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And my apologies, I did not set the timer that time. I'll try and be a little more diligent here about making sure everybody knows just how much time they've got. I believe I now have the other Jeff Brown.
Yes.
All right.
Hello,
Thank
Supervisor.
you. Thank you.
I'm the other Jeff Brown, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak
Thank
as well. I've been a 10-year homeowner in the North Palo Alto neighborhood, and as a homeowner in the neighborhood of North Palo Alto, I absolutely support the growth of Stanford University, and I believe that the goal of no net new trips proposed in the GUP is an admirable one, but it does not address two realities that impact my family and the other families in my neighborhood on a daily basis. Even if the goal is achieved, the existing infrastructure is already over capacity, especially on Embarcadero Road, due in no small part to Stanford University. And two, it does not address local traffic circulation and mobility, particularly in the neighborhoods adjacent to Embarcadero. After reading the second volume of the draft environmental impact report, I noticed that while it extensively studied traffic flow and mitigation strategies on the major thoroughfares and some of the neighborhood intersections, it did not include a comprehensive study of the old Palo Alto neighborhood, even while the nearby neighborhoods of Evergreen Park and Southgate are explicitly called out. This is a major oversight because Embarcadero is one of, if not the primary routes used to access Stanford, and a large percentage of the traffic that would ordinarily traverse it is forced down our smaller neighborhood streets, causing traffic congestion in our neighborhood and dangerous conditions for cyclists, students commuting to and from Palo Alto High and Walter Hayes Elementary. Thus, we have two requests: that the DEIR to be updated to include the traffic infusion on residential environmental, TIRE, methodology on the North Palo Alto neighborhood, and that the GUP include provisions for widening Embarcadero from 3 lanes to 4 near the Alma Street underpass, and for adding a pedestrian crossing from Pali to the town and country. Finally, and more generally, I didn't see any mention in the DEIR of how Caltrain electrification will impact the existing level crossings. This is another serious oversight, since the proposed mitigation strategies at all of these crossings will be insufficient before the expiration of the GUP in 2035. And the goal of no net new trips is contingent upon the increased ridership that will be made available by the electrification project. Given this, I feel that the DEIR should be updated to account for the increased traffic congestion at the impacted intersections, and that the GUP include a provision to help fund the grade separations. I would urge you to make acceptance of the GUP contingent upon these conditions. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Win Firth, and then Ms. Firth will be followed by our next three speakers, who are Penny Elson, Leslie Lowe, and Priya Graves, in that order. Welcome, Ms. Firth.
Thank you. My name is Win Firth. I've lived in Palo Alto for the last 20 years, and long before that, I spent 4 years living at Stanford and studying economics. And our professors impressed upon us that markets were generally a good thing, but they failed as signaling systems that would advance the community welfare if they didn't have an adequate regulatory framework that made them internalize the externalities. So if you had a business model that depended on free pollution of water and air or enslavement of your workers, that was a failed market, and we didn't get to where we ought to be. And in this case, of course, Stanford is the enterprise, it's the business, and it's the county that's the regulator with the responsibility for making those externalities internal. I don't know how many students and researchers and support staff Stanford and its campus can help, but I do believe that the EIR needs to analyze an alternative that provides enough housing for everyone who will be supporting the incremental development, including the support staff, of course, and also to address the existing externalizing of Stanford's housing shortage to the surrounding communities and the rippling, damaging effects. And after the EIR has analyzed that, then the GUP needs to require it. Stanford is so big and so wealthy, I tend to think of it as a duchy, but it's an unusually brilliant duchy. And I'm confident that it has the money, the land, and the intelligence to provide the necessary housing, childcare, education, and other services that its enterprise demands. And if it fails to do so, it's not only a practical failure upon the part of the Board of Trustees because they interfere with their own enterprise, but it's a moral failure with regard to both their workers and the larger community. Right now, one of the ways we handle the housing shortage is by imposing a time tax on workers and their families with their long commutes. And sometimes we joke that in Palo Alto, pretty soon everybody's going to have to spend 2 hours washing dishes in their favorite restaurant or making coffee in their favorite coffee shop. But of course, it's much more serious than that. This housing needs to be analyzed, and then it needs to be required, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Penny Elson to be followed by Leslie Lowe, to be followed by Priya Graves. Ms. Elson?
I'm sorry to tell you that your tricky sum up button is still on.
There we go.
There we go. I have a few general comments. After wading through 5,000 DER plus DER pages, I came to the stunning realization that though Stanford's DER relies very heavily on Caltrain to mitigate transportation impact, there is no proposed mitigation that would require Stanford to contribute a fair share toward creating the additional rail capacity they need. Instead, the mitigations include partial funding for motor vehicle intersection capacity improvements on county expressways and VTA-controlled roads, projects that will support county engineering jobs. These road capacity increases are coupled with proposals for thousands of new auto parking spaces. Why are the obviously needed mitigations related to supporting Caltrain capacity improvements ignored? I find the emphasis on motor vehicle parking and operational capacity worrisome. For starters, it's inconsistent with the policies of our comp plan. We know what the outcome of that kind of planning will be, an increase in car trips, which are likely to undermine gains made toward mode shift during the term of the last GUP. Risk associated with increasing car trips makes streets feel less comfortable to people who walk and bike. It pushes foot-powered commuters back into cars. How does this set of mitigations align with Stanford's no new net trip goals? The FEIR should consider planned growth in the comp plan EIRs of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Mountain View. Aggregates matter. The county recently overestimated available transit capacity in the ER of another project for a stadium with devastating consequence. Let's learn from that experience. And finally, I agree that further evaluation is needed regarding impacts at specific intersections, including Caltrain grade separation at Alma Charleston. The analysis should assess impacts with and without grade separations, and I'm being told to sum up. So I'm going to stop here and submit the rest of my comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
That takes us to Priya Graves, and she will be followed by Alice Kaufman, Jean McCown, and Peter from San Lorenzo.
I think she was supposed to be ahead of me.
Well, let's not do that.
Thank you.
Leslie Lowe.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hang on, Ms. Lowe. Let me make sure you get
All
that
right.
full 3 minutes as well.
Perfect,
All right,
thank
go
you.
to it.
Good evening. My name is Leslie Lowe, and I'm a senior planner at Stanford. I'd like to address comments about the no net new commute trip standard, specifically the concerns that Stanford can't make those no net new trips under the 2018 GUP. Stanford takes it very seriously when we say we want to make the no net new trip goal under the 2018 GUP. Our TDM program is nationally recognized as effective and innovative, and we did not take it lightly when we were committing to that standard for the next 17 years. Under the 2018 GUP, we need to move roughly 50 drivers a year to other modes of transportation. The pool of which to convert these drivers is over 3,000 existing commuters and any future drivers that may be coming to Stanford's campus. Our mode share model that we built as part of the 2018 GUP analysis shows that we can do that in multiple ways, and not just with Caltrain. Examples include a new commuter shuttle, which could put 50 people on just one bus, key bicycle infrastructure projects, or van pools. We can use 10 new van pools and move with 5 people each, and that's 50 people. So we really feel that this is an achievable goal. We believe our TDM program needs to continue to be flexible because it needs to adapt to changing technologies such as automation, which all the transportation planners are looking for, where our people are living, and what infrastructure becomes in place. Building out over 17 years means that lots of things will change both locally and regionally, and we need to be flexible to implement programs that work so we can continue to be successful. I'd also like to address comments from the community that state that Stanford's existing trip monitoring program doesn't go far enough to reduce traffic congestion. Specifically, that because it focuses on the peak hour, that the university has been able to push traffic outside the peak hour in order to meet our requirements. The peak hour monitoring is a limited snapshot of traffic conditions. However, 2 other metrics that are tracked point to our all-day success that Stanford has been able to move trips. Our single occupancy vehicle rate has dropped from 72% in 2002 to 43% today. This reduction illustrates that our TDM program is working and is successful at moving commuters to other modes of transportation. Our vehicle miles traveled analysis considered the average amount of car travel driven by a person in our population. The VMT analysis for the 2018 GUP found that Stanford's commuter VMT in 2035 will be 70% below our regional average of 16 miles per capita. The way average VMT decreases is not by moving a person closer for a shorter trip, but it's about moving people out of their cars, which points to the success of our TDM program. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that now it's Priya Graves, followed by Alice Kaufman, Peter from San Lorenzo, and Jean McCown. Welcome.
Good evening, former Mayor and Supervisor Simitian. My biggest concern with this project is that we are looking at it in a piecemeal fashion. I understand that that's how CEQA works, that we're talking only about the Stanford campus. But this campus cannot be looked at without also looking at the hospital, without also looking at the 180 units of housing coming online in the Stanford Park area on the north end of California, or south end, I guess it is, of California Avenue. All of these things are interrelated. Ms. Nyack spoke to the folks that are being housed out in the research park, or not housed, but officed in the research park. All of these things need to be looked at as a unit. Stanford is a monumental institution. We all acknowledge that, and we all acknowledge that we have benefits from it. But if we bifurcate all this stuff into little compartments, we have no control over the effect that it has on our community. With respect to traffic, the peak hour problem, we're looking at 10 hours a week of when the traffic is happening. The other 158 hours is kind of like, okay, well, just traffic whenever you want to. We need to be looking at overall traffic 24/7, particularly now that the commute hour has spread to about a 3 or 4 hour window. Finally, the issue of long-term sustainability, the build-out plan. Stanford needs to step up and take a leadership role in setting an example of how a major institution can achieve sustainability. Sustainability all across every aspect of its existence. Sustainability with its construction, sustainability with traffic, sustainability with population, open space, everything. And Stanford is well positioned to play that leadership role in setting an example of how to get to sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Alice Kaufman from Redwood City, then Peter from San Lorenzo, and then Jean McCown. Welcome.
Thank you. Alice Kaufman. I'm the Legislative Advocacy Director with Committee for Green Foothills, which is an open space and natural resources organization working in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. And our concern is about the academic growth boundary, which limits development on the Stanford campus to within a boundary line that's roughly aligned with Junipero Serra Boulevard. The academic growth boundary was established by the Stanford Community Plan in the year 2000, and it requires a 4 out of 5 vote by the County Board of Supervisors to change, move, or abolish the boundary line, or to permit any development beyond it. That 4/5 vote requirement was established for a period of 25 years, meaning it will expire in 2025. We believe that this supermajority vote requirement should be a permanent requirement for the academic growth boundary. Santa Clara County's general plan states that the unincorporated county area is not the place for intense development uses. Cities, if they want to annex unincorporated land in order to grow beyond their boundaries, must apply to Santa Clara County's LAFCO, the agency which is required to weigh the importance of preserving open space and agricultural lands, as well as the ill effects of sprawl on both open space and efficient delivery of services, before approving any annexation request. Since Stanford is not under the jurisdiction of LAFCO or any other independent body whose mission is to examine these impacts, it becomes more than ever important that the barrier to approving development in the foothills is higher than a simple majority of the 5-member board. Committee for Green Foothills was founded to protect the open space of the Palo Alto foothills. Although we have now expanded and we work on many issues in both San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, including sea level rise, urban parks, agriculture, wildlife corridors, preserving old growth redwoods, and so on, we still remember our founding members who gathered in a living room in 1959 with the mantra of keep factories out of the foothills. We still value the foothills and believe they should be preserved for the next generation to enjoy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That takes us to Peter from San Lorenzo, followed by Jean McCown. Peter, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Eugenio, and I'm here, and I'm a member of SEIU Local 2007. I work on campus in dining as a storekeeper. I'm here representing my fellow coworkers. I believe that if Stanford wants to show that they value their coworkers or their workers, they would make a commitment, a solid commitment to housing their workers like myself. My coworkers and I would benefit from having access to below market rate housing on campus. This would mean that I wouldn't have to commute as far as I do, and I would have more resources to take care of my family. I think that the current draft EIR doesn't address the housing shortage that exists, and Stanford could help mitigate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Jean McCown, and Ms. McCown will be followed by Cecily Foote, C. Reddy, and David Shen, in that order. Ms. McCown, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Jean McCown, Stanford University. I want to speak briefly to why we've proposed this plan. The university's mission of teaching, its state-of-the-art research, and the commitment to interdisciplinary collaboration depends on growth of our physical spaces, to continue to facilitate discoveries that address problems of global significance. Knowledge is continually expanding. New fields of research continue to emerge. Academic space needs to meet the needs of these new academic fields and sustain leadership in them. Many fields of research require highly specialized facilities to conduct experiments with stringent safety standards. Other fields require large physical spaces for large-scale instruments to accomplish the work. Opportunities will develop over the course of the 2018 general use permit that we cannot predict today. The flexibility to accommodate unexpected emerging opportunities has allowed the university to produce some of its most exciting innovations. For example, under the 2000 general use permit, Stanford did not foresee the Stanford Energy Systems Innovation Facility, which has completely changed the way the campus is able to do its heating and cooling. We understand why people are concerned about the impact of growth. And in submitting the application in 2016, Stanford took care to include many elements in it in order to avoid negative environmental impacts. And so we are actually encouraged by the results of the draft EIR. The county's draft EIR studied 80 potential significant impact areas in a variety of resources. It found that there are no significant impacts at all in 47 of these areas. 29 can be mitigated to less than significant, leaving 4 that are labeled significant and unavoidable. 2 of these are temporary construction noise impacts and a possible impact on historic resources. The remaining 2 impacts do concern traffic, local intersections, and freeway road impacts. However, the conclusions are based on the very conservative assumption that Stanford will do nothing more to reduce automobile trips through its transportation demand management programs. As you heard from my colleague Leslie Lowe, we do not believe that is the case. In fact, Stanford intends to continue to expand its TDM programs so as not to add new commute trips. We have accomplished this goal for the last 15 years, and we intend to continue to do so under this GUP, or under the next GUP. Also, the DER does show reductions in campus-related air pollutants, vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gases. In sum, Stanford is committed to grow in a manner that will not result in significant adverse impacts. Our growth is necessary to further the mission of teaching and research, resulting in local, regional, and worldwide innovations, discoveries, and benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we have Cecily Foote, C. Reddy, and David Chen.
Hello, my name is Cecily Foote, and I am a graduate student at Stanford, and I'm a member of the Stanford Coalition for Planning an Equitable 2035. In the past, we have commented specifically about our concerns with the analyses on greenhouse gas emissions, housing, transportation, and the need for consideration for a maximum build-out scenario. We will be submitting these comments to the county, and tonight would like to simply highlight a few issues in each of these areas.
Ms. Foote, excuse the interruption. Before you highlight, I want to make sure that everybody can hear.
Sure thing.
And let me just mention a couple of things. One is the system's a little interesting, which is if I turn off my microphone, then you get a little louder, which is a good thing. But I think we also just need folks to speak right up, because I'm getting enough looks from the rear of the chambers that suggest that it's a little hard to hear. So if you can just all speak right up into the microphone. We'll also see if we can get staff in the back to give us a little bit more volume, but you do have to speak up. I'm hearing you pretty well, but I want to make sure that everyone who's in the room can hear you as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and start your time again. Go to it.
Okay. For the greenhouse gas emissions, it seems that the draft EIR drastically overestimates the population used to determine whether Stanford is on track to comply with future statewide decarbonization targets. As a result, our analysis shows that Stanford's development will exceed state targets. We ask for these numbers to be revised for Stanford as a world leader in sustainability to make appropriate adjustments to its plans. For housing analysis, it seems clear that Stanford does not plan to provide enough housing, let alone for those who need it, such as its own staff and workers. In part, this is because the housing linkage ratio used significantly underestimates the number of housing needed. As far as off-campus impacts, Stanford's proposed $20 per square feet of development fee is insignificant compared to the actual fee needed to offset impacts. Based on the Nexus study conducted by Palo Alto, it should be closer to $264 per square foot, or $177 per square foot based on our own calculations.
For the record, we'll observe that that's more. Go back to you.
And for transportation, counting trips only during peak hours provides only a limited snapshot of Stanford's transportation impacts. We ask for this window to be increased to more fully capture Stanford's impacts and urge strongly to expand the transportation benefits program to all workers as a way to address these impacts. Lastly, we find no indication that Stanford has considered a maximum build-out scenario, as was required in the Sustainable Development Study in 2009. At the minimum, the 2018 GUP should ensure that a study of absolute maximum build-out be conducted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, that takes us to C. Reddy, to be followed by David Shen. Mr. Reddy, welcome.
Good evening. My name is C. Reddy. I live right across on Stanford Avenue, 747, right across the campus. I've been here 4 years. I came from Newport Beach and Irvine and all that. Just to put the right setting, as citizens, we all need to realize we're not in a Truman administration. You're talking like we have these small issues, the GUP here, GUP there. We need to think a bit higher. We're in the Trump administration, where we are being, possibly in 5 years, we would have North Korea attack us with the missiles and all that. So Stanford is a national institution, and it's also an international institution to keep our peace. Are you kidding if you're talking about parking here, parking there, I need this housing? All of these 25, 30 speakers have spoken everything we need, but we need to go one step above. We need to work for keeping this country safe. Who can do it? There are 5, 10 institutions that can do it. You know who made us win the war in 1947? Berkeley, by inventing a nuclear weapon to be able to sustain the power of Germany and Japan. Are you kidding? These are all small things. Here, I propose a few things for you to think about. So we all need housing. Who is going to disagree that we need housing? Nobody. We know it's expensive. So when we throw out the north side of the mall, who needs the Neiman Marcus, who needs Bloomingdale so close to us?
Mr. Reddy,
Take them out of here.
Mr. Reddy, I'm going to ask you to address your remarks this way, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take all that stuff away, put housing there, put very high-end PhDs and research people to prevent nuclear wars. Are you kidding? These are small stuff. My neighbor says, the Stanford people can park in front of my house. Yeah, that is valid. But do you want to live here 10 years from now, or you want to be attacked? So I think the GUP, I give a grade of D, if not F. GUP doesn't talk about what we need to do as a nation. We are being attacked. Are you kidding? China is going to take over. East Germany is going to, not East Germany, I'm sorry. Northern Korea is going to take over. Some rogue element in Middle East is going to have a nuclear weapon that's going to kill us all. What do you want first? You want to talk about traffic? Well, traffic can be solved. I went to Basel the other day. Everything isn't by train. It has been proven. Tube in London. This is all noise stuff. We need to think about long term. Think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to David Shen, and Mr. Shen will be followed by Shani Kleinhaus, Gail Shradonovich, and Diane Bailey. Welcome, Mr. Shen.
Good evening, supervisors. I'm Dave Shen. I'm a resident in Palo Alto. Stanford's general use permit application proposes to grow their campus significantly. As everyone knows, this will have significant impact on Palo Alto. I'm all for seeing the admirable institution grow and prosper. However, the current structure under which their growth is proposed to occur puts an unfair cost burden on the surrounding areas. Their plans, if executed to the fullest, will introduce an incredible number of families, employees, and thus traffic into Palo Alto. I would urge that the supervisors take the following into consideration when evaluating the Stanford GUP. With the introduction of so many families into Palo Alto, it is likely we would see a surge of school-age children into the area. I would urge that Stanford provide resources and funding to create room for their education, either expanding existing schools or creating new schools. With the introduction of more people and employees into Palo Alto, the existing transportation infrastructure will be stretched to the maximum. I urge that Stanford should contribute to the infrastructure improvements necessary to support the proposed influx of new residents so that the cost burden is not placed solely on the residents of the Palo Alto community. My understanding is that Stanford's research into traffic impacts does not include traffic flows into the surrounding neighborhoods, especially through North Old Palo Alto, where I live. I also urge that Stanford include these traffic flows in its research and impact studies. As you may know, it is not unprecedented that universities contribute some level of lost tax to their surrounding communities. For example, it is my understanding that Harvard, MIT, and Boston University have long-term agreements with their city to contribute 12 to 12.5% of lost tax. The Santa Clara County assessor has noted that Stanford has a tax exemption on over $11.6 billion in property value. Think of what we could do with a portion of that lost tax revenue and the benefits we could realize here in Palo Alto. I would urge the supervisors to place these requirements, among others, on Stanford and gain their agreement before accepting their new GUP application. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. All right, that takes us to Shani Kleinhaus, Gail Shradonovich, and Diane Bailey. Ms. Kleinhaus, welcome.
Thank you, Supervisor Simitian. I'm Shani Kleinhaus. I'm a resident of Palo Alto, and I'm the environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I am here to speak about bird collisions. Bird collisions are recognized these days as one of the leading causes of the decline of birds in North America. Hundreds of millions of birds every year. It's a cumulative impact. It cannot be mitigated building by building. It has to be a policy that looks at the Stanford campus as a whole and looking at how to mitigate the impact of glass and new buildings and new structures, whether they're antennas, any other new structure. This is why cities like Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and others have developed various types of guidelines, mitigations, ordinances, and other ways to implement and to mitigate for the bird collisions in the cities. The county itself, and thank you, Supervisor Simitian, has directed their own campus to be a bird-safe campus as it is developed in the next few years. So I'm here to ask that detailed mitigations should be developed, or otherwise other ways to enforce or to require bird-safe design. You can use the guidelines that are required by the City of Sunnyvale or the Mountain View North Bayshore Precise Plan as an example and have that in the EIR. I want to say something about Oaklands as well. The discussion of whether loss of oak woodlands is a significant impact and how you can mitigate for that by potentially protecting oaks elsewhere or by planting new trees. I don't see how anyone can conclude that loss of a tree that's more than 300 years old can be not a significant impact. And if it is, it should be avoided. I have a lot more, but I'll submit written comments as well. Thank you. And I have something for Director Girard.
Mr. Girard, I'm going to ask you to take that for the record. Thank you, Ms. Kleinhaus. That takes us to Gail Shradonovich and then Diane Bailey.
Good evening. I want to thank Supervisor Simitian for having a hearing someplace near Stanford that we can get to without driving a long distance. I would remind everybody that Stanford is at the very edge of Santa Clara County and has huge impacts on San Mateo County, while San Mateo County residents are routinely excluded from having a vote on these matters. I am a Stanford alumna. My son is a Stanford alumnus. My excellent primary care is at Stanford, but she was excellent before Stanford bought out her clinic. I would notice that all cities and jurisdictions continue to permit the building of more offices while we all live with a huge jobs housing imbalance. Insanity is sometimes defined as continuing to do the same thing while expecting a different outcome. It seems like it's time to do something different. And my comments are a little bit disjointed, but relate to things I've heard at this hearing. I question the definition of peak hour. Yes, it's more like all day, but concentrated most heavily at 4 hours. I heard the percent of reduction in single occupancy vehicles presented as a measure of success, but if it's a percentage of a steadily growing number, that's a little bit disingenuous. It could even be called deceptive. And I would note that Stanford Hospital has said it needed more room. Of course, it always needs more room, but at the same time, they're spending huge amounts of money on ads in every single local newspaper and on the television, which no other institution does. I would say that below market rate housing was mentioned. Just remember that below market rate is usually not affordable to the low wage earner. These below market rate units are really only affordable to people who have a pretty substantial income. And finally, I would say that when you have a steady overgrowth of cells in the human body, it's called a cancer. And as a person who lives right near this, I would say I agree with all the excellent factual analyses of people who questioned the plan. And for myself personally, I would say enough already. Give us a break. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And before I ask Diane Bailey to step up to the microphone, which I'm going to do in just a moment, I should mention one point that was raised that it may be helpful for me to clarify is Stanford lands in the immediate vicinity, which I believe are in the neighborhood of 8,000 acres, are shared among 6 different local governmental entities that have land use authority. So one of the challenges in having a thoughtful and comprehensive discussion, let alone decision-making process, is that while 4,000 of those acres are in unincorporated Santa Clara County, and that is the area for which the county has jurisdiction, as the comment suggested, there are other jurisdictions as well. Some of those lands, as I think many here know, are in the city of Palo Alto. Some are in the city of Menlo Park, Woodside, Portola Valley, and unincorporated San Mateo County. So you got 6 different players, and one of the challenges that we face is making sure that we have a comprehensive view of what's going on in all 6 of those jurisdictions and how the actions in one jurisdiction affect what's happening in the other jurisdictions in total. Last comment I should just make is, just so you know, for our friends in Menlo Park, I have an op-ed piece in this week's Menlo Park Almanac, specifically inviting their comment prior to the February 2nd cutoff date for precisely this reason, which is I know folks in Menlo Park are not used to participating in public agency discussions in Santa Clara County, let alone Santa Clara County, where the headquarters is in San Jose. So my hope is that anyone who feels affected in any of these other jurisdictions will find a way to participate and weigh in prior to that February 2nd date for our comment period. Diane Bailey, thank you for your patience. Where are you?
Not to be rude, but when there was a chance to vote on this, we didn't get to vote. Only Palo Alto residents.
All right, and I'm going to ask you to please keep your comments limited to those at the microphone, please. I'm going to call Diane Bailey one more time.
Diane Bailey said that she left because she couldn't stay, but she wanted to sign on to the, she's from Menlo Park, wants to sign on to the stove comment.
All right, thank you. That takes us to Hal Mickelson, Whitney McNair, and Karen Porter. So, Mr. Mickelson, you're up. And welcome.
Supervisor, thank you for being here to sit patiently through just a wealth of inputs. I'm Hal Mickelson. I'm a resident of the Green Meadow neighborhood of Palo Alto. I'll comment briefly on a minor matter and then on the big picture. A relatively minor matter is the point in the environmental impact statement that there could be risks to historic structures that need to be considered. Let's say a word about that. Stanford has been an incomparably good steward of the historic buildings and architecturally meritorious buildings on the campus. The work done in the reconstruction of the History Corner, the work done in the imaginative reuse of the Robley Gymnasium, the work done in the seismic retrofit of other historic structures shows that Stanford values the historic buildings on campus and has a record of preserving them responsibly. So it has to be a point to check off in the environmental impact report, but I think it's one in which Stanford has built considerable credibility. That leads to the bigger issue, which is that Stanford has built great credibility in traffic demand management. It has not only been successful with the Marguerite shuttle system and moving people to Caltrain, but it has been successful in attaining its goal of no net increase in commute trips. And it has data to back itself up. This is the third set of these inputs that I've sat through, and I keep on hearing people say, I look out the window, I see more traffic, and I blame Stanford. And that's not fair. Stanford has the numbers to show that its traffic demand management efforts have been a world-class success. And if you say, well, you can improve the measurement by not measuring just at peak commute hours, surely Stanford would be open. I think they've already said they are open to looking at new measures for traffic demand management as they come along. We're lucky to have a university here which does not grow by gobbling up adjoining neighborhoods. We're lucky that it wants to do this building on the 900 acres of existing academic reserve as infill, the most responsible kind of building and development. We're lucky that thousands of acres have been set aside for preservation in the foothills. We're lucky that Stanford has brought so much business and prosperity, and it can maintain that leadership, as Gene McCown said, only if it has the opportunity to keep pace in the facilities it needs. The Stanford proposal deserves strong support from this county. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Whitney McNair to be followed by Karen Porter. Ms. McNair, welcome.
Good evening, Supervisor Simitian. Thank you for hosting the meeting tonight. My name is Whitney McNair, and I do land use planning at Stanford University. Stanford is committed to providing more housing for its students and employees on and near campus. A significant part of the request before the county is actually to build 3,150 new either units or beds. And the request supports the university's mission to provide a residentially oriented educational experience. Because Stanford's long-standing commitment to building housing, Stanford is fortunate to have a robust housing portfolio on and near campus. By 2020, Stanford will have over 14,000 student beds, and additionally, we will house close to 2,000 faculty, postdocs, and staff near campus or on campus. The application provides the ability to add more housing and play a continued leadership role in supplying housing to the region. Stanford also continues a unique planning practice of linking academic space and housing so that housing is built on pace with new academic facilities at a rate of, in this case, it's 605 beds or units for every 500,000 square feet of new academic space. That is truly unique in the planning world. Beyond building on-campus housing, Stanford has contributed $26 million to Santa Clara County's Affordable Housing Fund and anticipates to contribute $11 million more under the current general use permit. These contributions have funded over 280 units of local affordable housing, as well as Santa Clara County's portion of a joint effort with the City of Palo Alto and the Housing Authority of Santa Clara County to acquire and preserve the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. The proposed 2018 general use permit includes an additional approximately $56 million contribution through 2035 for a total of about $93 million. The combination of contributing to the Affordable Housing Fund and committing to new housing construction is uncommon, and demonstrates Stanford's ongoing commitment to helping address the regional housing challenges we all face. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. That takes us to Karen Porter. Ms. Porter, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I'll just echo many of the comments that have already been made, expressing some concerns about associated with this development. In particular, as someone who lives not far from Embarcadero Road and who travels Embarcadero Road, I am concerned with the increased traffic, not just once the development is in place, but particularly during the construction phase, having gotten stuck behind a large truck not too long ago. So I really hope all efforts will be made to mitigate. I don't know exactly what can be done, but just thinking about the amount of large trucks that are going to be on Embarcadero is a little concerning, and also the impact it's going to have on the roadway itself. Another comment I would just make, admittedly, I haven't studied their draft EIR, so I'm not sure exactly if this is addressed, but maybe because of recent comments from our president, it caused me to be thinking about what do they do with all the biological waste that's going to be associated with this increased development. If it goes into Palo Alto's system, perhaps there can be some resources dedicated to improving Palo Alto's waste disposal system, and in particular, the anaerobic digester project that Palo Alto had considered a few years ago. We have land set aside. Maybe Stanford could, at least at a minimum, as a good neighbor, devote some resources and planning towards developing this digester system, which would take care of not only sewage, but also compostable waste, and then generate methane gas, which would really be a net gain for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our next three speakers will be John O'Connell, Peter Dreckmeyer, and either Tim or Tom, I believe it's Lichty. Mr. O'Connell?
Good evening. To some extent, you've recognized my first comment, which is that Stanford is a multi-jurisdictional entity, and we're focusing here tonight on the aspect of Stanford University and the educational space, which is in Santa Clara unincorporated. But Stanford is expanding throughout Palo Alto. The Stanford Hospital is constantly expanding. The Stanford Research Park, which is now a business park, is constantly expanding. We've lived here for 20 years. We live in Los Altos Hills, and our children went to school in Palo Alto Unified School District. It is almost impossible to be able to traverse the roads during school hours for people to get their children to school because of the massive numbers of people trying to get to the facilities which Stanford is building in these other areas. So my main comment is that this should be looked at as a collective negotiation with Stanford. I think most towns would love to have a university with the credentials and reputation of Stanford. If I had to choose between 10 things to have in the Palo Alto area, it would be one of the top 10. But there are many other things which Stanford is building in the research park, which I believe they should be asked to forego. So my input is, in order to negotiate with Stanford, this should be looked at as a collective expansion, including all of the things they want to develop outside of just Santa Clara unincorporated. The second issue is, I think most of us recognize that the environment we live in is struggling to deal with the demands that's placed upon it. And we pay very high property taxes. I think Stanford being able to claim that all of its work is education and being exempt from paying tax doesn't seem fair. So I think if they want to expand primarily in PhDs and postgraduate sort of areas, they should probably start to have to pay for the facilities that they're using in the community. Those are the two main areas. I'll put my other comments as written comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, for the many speakers who've mentioned or referenced written comments as well, please do remember that's immensely helpful, and you can speak tonight and put written comments into the hopper as well, as long as we are receiving them by that February 2nd, Friday, 5 p.m. deadline. Peter Dreckmeyer to be followed by Tim or Tom Lichty, and forgive me, Tim or Tom.
Good evening, Supervisor Simitian and others. I'd like to thank you for having these meetings in Palo Alto, where it's easier for us to attend. My name is Peter Dreckmeyer. I was born and raised in Palo Alto, born at the Stanford Hospital. I live in Palo Alto now. I formerly was on the City Council here, and I was the director of the Stanford Open Space Alliance in 1999 and 2000. And I am a former employee of Stanford, something very few people know. That was back in college during the summers. I wanted to deliver a petition that we have been working on. And this calls for a few things. One is establishing a maximum build-out on the campus, as was required to be studied in the 2000 community plan, Stanford Community Plan, but was never done. And I want to thank the City of Palo Alto for embracing that idea at their meeting last night and including that in their comments. Permanent protection of the foothills above Junipero Serra. Making sure that any new people coming to the area as a result of the new development are housed on campus or nearby. Make sure that there are no new trips generated in the extended commute time. And we'd love to see Stanford adopt a policy of carbon neutrality for all new construction. So we've had 450 people sign this petition so far. I will leave it with you here. And if anyone in the audience has not signed and would like to, you can find it at iPetitions and look for support sustainable development at Stanford. A couple things I hope you'll pay special attention to is cumulative impacts of Stanford development amongst the different jurisdictions. I think that there is an attempt at times to take credit for some of the positive things happening in other jurisdictions, for example, housing in Palo Alto, but not looking at some of the negative things that happen in Palo Alto, a lot of jobs without places to house those people. An example is the Stanford West Apartments, which houses more than 600 units. Across the street is the Stanford Hospital, also in Palo Alto, and that's going to bring 2,000 new people to the area. And the other is traffic, and I've seen a lot of comments from people who I have a lot of respect for in the community who have found a number of flaws in the traffic analysis. I'm sure you heard some of those comments tonight. I'm sorry, I just got here a little while ago, so I didn't hear them all, but that's going to be a huge issue for the future of our region. So thank you again for making this easy for us.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask you to hand that petition to Mr. Gerard, who's seated right here. Thank you so much. Tim or Tom, and my apologies. Help me with both the first name and the last name.
Hi, folks. It's Tim Lichty. I'm new to Palo Alto, and it's a pleasure to be part of the conversation. I just want to say I strongly support the growth in general in the plan. I think that the education and innovative thinking that Stanford brings is great for students, the city, and the world as a whole. I think it's also very important to really prioritize affordable housing. I think everybody, regardless of background and income, should be able to participate in this awesome ecosystem. I wanted to really focus my time on technology and the opportunity that some of the new emerging technologies can bring to some of these challenges, especially having to do with congestion and traffic and whatnot. As we know, technology is advancing faster than ever, and it's obvious to say that 17 years is an extremely long time. You can't go down where I'm in Palo Alto without seeing some of the Waymo, the self-driving vehicles going down the streets. By 2035, most people are projecting that there will be mass adoption of self-driving vehicles, and that millions of self-driving vehicles will be on the road within 5 to 10 years. So I think it's a great opportunity to be thinking about how that could fundamentally change some of the problems that we're dealing with. Let me be clear, I'm talking about self-driving vehicles for traffic. I agree that traffic and lots of cars in general on the road is a bad thing. Nobody wants traffic. But I think there is a big opportunity for making use of self-driving vehicles for shared use, movement of people within the campus. And so, could definitely be wrong in this, but one thesis would be that some people choose to commute via car from outside of campus because, it's just kind of a pain getting that last mile or the last 2 miles. And I wonder how many people may actually consider, who currently drive to Stanford, might actually consider taking a bus or might consider the Caltrain if they could simply get off, perhaps take a Margaret or some other kind of large shuttle onto campus, and then get right to where they're going a little bit closer at the end of it. I think that there's some great opportunity for recognizing new space as well through those new modes of transportation, or those new methods. An example is there are several hundred Stanford work vehicles alone. The vehicles in general are used about 5 to 10% of the time, so most of the time their footprint is just sitting in parking lots or on the streets taking up space and not really giving us much value. If those can be used more towards shared use, higher utilization of those vehicles means fewer parking lots available for more space and more housing, and as well, when there's higher utilization of vehicles, it makes more economic sense to go electric and to go hybrid. I know that Stanford's already working on some pilot projects. In fact, they're working with the group that I'm with as well. I'd encourage you to really look at those win-win opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers will be Rita from Palo Alto, and forgive me, I have just can't make out that last name. And then Grant Dasher, I believe, to be followed by Pat Burt. Welcome.
Rita Varel. So most of the comments that I was going to make have already been made. I would hope that the transcript from the City Council meeting last night will be included in the comments that go to the supervisors. Many speakers spoke eloquently about some of the issues that have been brought up tonight. I think part of the problem is that as a Palo Alto resident for more than 35 years, we have all heard during the last particular 20 years that all of the projects that have been put forward by Stanford and built in Palo Alto or built on Stanford campus, actually, if they do have issues, they can't be mitigated or they're not significant. And as a person who lives in Crescent Park, I realize that if you go down Lincoln, Middlefield, Embarcadero, University, Center, West Crescent, you can't move. And so when you look out your window and you can't get out of your driveway for 3 hours, somehow the idea that nothing that has been built on Stanford or in Palo Alto has significant consequences leaves one wondering, why is this problem here if nothing was going to cause any significance? So I think there's actually an issue of trust with both what is going on in the city of Palo Alto and what is proposed to go on in Stanford. The roads are clogged. It may not be all Stanford's problem, but when you look at a build-out of this size, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there are going to be new trips, that the 9,500 people that are being brought in are going to have families. The 2,900 new jobs up on 450 Broadway are going to have an impact on the whole area. So I think the idea of looking at this as a cumulative problem and looking at where is the growth occurring and how does it impact all of the area would be an admirable idea. Thank you.
Thank you. It takes us to Grant Dasher and to Pat Burt. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Grant Dasher. I'm a Palo Alto resident. I've only lived here for a couple years, so I don't have, the 30 years of history that some of our wonderful residents have. But I wanted to point out, I found this whole topic very interesting because, I used to live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the relationship between the universities and the city there is rather different from what it is here. This whole multi-jurisdictional thing is really certainly complicating the issue. But I also think that it's an interesting opportunity because there's just so much more land here to play with. And I do think that unlike in Cambridge where it wasn't really practicable for the universities to build all of the housing for their students, I do think there's an opportunity to build a lot more housing here. And I think Stanford is clearly committing to building housing, but I think they could push that much further than they've done in their proposals, and I think this is an opportunity to require that to happen. I have a lot of friends who are Stanford graduate students or Stanford postdocs, and none of them live in Stanford University housing. All of them live in Palo Alto or Menlo Park or Redwood City, and many of them do commute via public transit, but some do cars. And I think this growth issue rankles all of us. My personal belief is that growth is ultimately inevitable, and we need to figure out appropriate mitigations. And the appropriate mitigation in this case is to try and minimize the transportation impact and try and localize housing as close to jobs as possible. And I think that Stanford this is an opportunity, with higher impact fees, for example. I certainly support something in the neighborhood of what Palo Alto has in the 60 range, as opposed to the proposed $20 affordable housing impact fee. But other policy proposals on the housing front, and just in terms of building more units, both affordable, but also units for the student population. Shifting to transportation for a second, I think this is really important. I think that, I'm really optimistic and excited for the future of Caltrain. I think it's an opportunity to really radically change the way people commute in the Bay Area if the service becomes regular enough to actually replace lots of car travel. But I think in order to make that work, we need things like grade separation. We need, redesigned multimodal interconnects. We need better bike commuting from the Palo Alto Caltrain station to Stanford. And I think, Stanford could really play a major role in this. And I would encourage the county to require, further investment from Stanford in terms of public transit infrastructure, specifically around the Palo Alto Caltrain station and its bike interconnects with the main Stanford campus, but also in terms of grade separation. Grade separation is a massive unfunded liability on the city of Palo Alto, just like it is on other communities up and down the peninsula. And I think that major employers in the area really have an obligation, if not legally, morally, to contribute to solving that problem. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And that takes us to Pat Burt. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you to Supervisor Simitian for the leadership he has played in helping to assure that the Palo Alto community is being heard, and as well as in helping us have this 60-day extension so that the public has been able to have a better understanding and begin to uncover more relevant comments on the draft EIR and the GUP in general. I certainly hope that as we go forward, the city is going to take on the strong role that it had in the 2000 GUP in promoting community participation. But we also have this oddity that's been spoken about, that the county is the governing body with oversight of the general use permit, but the impacts are really on the city of Palo Alto and the surrounding communities principally, and not, for the most part, on the county as a whole. So we're having to rely on the county government to look out for the interests of Palo Alto and Menlo Park and East Palo Alto and Mountain View and Los Altos. So thank you for doing that task. I'd also like to put into context that Stanford has done some really outstanding measures on both their transportation demand management and more recently on embracing an aggressive sustainability plan. But we in this region are facing really a different set of circumstances from when we looked at the 2000 GUP. it's hard to argue that today's traffic and housing and climate change conditions are sustainable in our region. So merely allowing a continuation of what seemed to be progressive practices in 2000 is probably not the standard by which we need to judge not only the GUP, but all of our regional efforts. To that end, just having some form of a limitation on the impacts, I think, needs to be reconsidered. When we look at what we're doing in climate change, we aren't talking about simply maintaining the status quo. We have to reduce. So one point that was made earlier on the transportation side is that what we thought no net trips meant does not appear to be what it does mean. We thought it meant that there would be a cap on the trips that would pass through our community to access the Stanford campus. We now understand that two changes to that exist to some degree that we really don't know the degree to which it's occurring. There are credits for when the no net trips is exceeded, and those credits are being able to be drawn from Marguerite trips that are in fact, in some cases, satellite parking that's coming to Palo Alto and then traveling into campus. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for respecting the time limit. Sue Dinwiddie will be followed by Jeff Lazarus, will be followed by Jason Matloff. Ms. Dinwiddie, then Mr. Lazarus, then Mr. Matloff. And folks, we're probably about a half an hour away from wrapping up if you're trying to gauge just how much more seat time you can take tonight. Okay, Ms. Dinwiddie, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sue Dinwiddie, and thank you for having this session so that people can air their concerns. I've been a resident of Palo Alto since 1963, and I'm also a former employee of Stanford University. And I have great respect for Stanford University, and I love Palo Alto. It's a wonderful, unique community, but it's changing, and it's changing very, very rapidly, and not always in a positive direction. And the two areas I'm the most concerned about are traffic, as you've heard tonight, and parking. Parking is becoming a great problem. It is a problem on campus, but it's also a problem just on the streets of Palo Alto and many, many neighborhoods. And I don't see us doing anything to address that. I'm not sure what the answers are. I think possibly a satellite parking area, someplace like in the Baylands, where then people would be shuttled in, might help somewhat. I don't know. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I do know we have a tremendous problem. We have a lot of gridlock now, and if we add more and more units, that means more and more cars, I'm afraid. So basically, those are my two concerns. I also worry somewhat, should we have a regional catastrophe, which is probably going to happen, unfortunately, at some point. Our emergency services, I'm worried about them even getting into the area to be able to help us because of the traffic situation that we have. And I'm also concerned about other parts of the infrastructure. For example, the schools. We have a very fine school system in Palo Alto, and we want to keep it. We would like to have that all over the country. So if we have more children, we want to be sure that we build up the infrastructure to support those children, which could mean more schools and more teachers. So thank you for your time and again for having this session.
Thank you. Jeff Lazarus to be followed by Jason Matloff.
Hi, thank you all for coming and thanks for this opportunity. I'm very embarrassed. I went to the wrong meeting. I didn't realize this was it. I missed the beginning presentation, and I don't want to waste anyone's time because of my faux pas. I'm a resident of Menlo Park, and my big concern is traffic, quite frankly. This has probably been reviewed, and I just want to go on the record as saying it again. Right now, when you think about north-south, you think about El Camino, 280, and Alameda or Santa Cruz. The Stanford hospitals, when they open up their new hospitals, it's just going, right now it's bad. Sand Hill Road, anyone who lives here knows what Sand Hill Road is like. And to have extra buildings, the hospital's opening up, plus the new building that Stanford is constructing on Sand Hill, I just, we're going to go from bad to worse. I'm very, very concerned about this for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure other people have said this earlier and more eloquently than I did. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for making the effort to be with us tonight. Jason Matloff, and then we're going to hear from Alan Kaiser, Jim Miguel, and Greg Welsh. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to add my voice to the opposition to the Stanford GUP proposal. Specifically, I find it totally unacceptable that Stanford's proposing to add millions of square feet of new development and almost 10,000 new bodies at the campus without specifically being required to fund mitigation strategies to address all the things that everybody's been talking about: traffic, horrific traffic problems, terrible parking problems, and the housing shortage. So I guess to start, what I would ask is that before we approve anything, before you and your peers approve anything, please make make a prerequisite that the GUP approval be dependent upon them funding specific mitigations that are not yet addressed. And I think many people have talked about a variety of different things, so I'm just going to focus on one particular thing, which is traffic. The traffic is horrendous. I've lived here for almost 25 years. There's a variety of people that have spoken that have lived here 30, 40 years. I guess I don't want to be emotional and maybe bring emotional charged comments here, but the representatives from Stanford that spoke were using all this self-congratulatory language about how they've done all these traffic mitigation, the TPDs and so forth. What I would say is you have people here that have lived here for decades, right? We have seen the massive congestion problems, the parking problems, the housing shortage issues. There's no new residences, no new housing that's driving that. We had some commercial growth, but it pales in comparison to the massive growth that's gone on at the Stanford Industrial Park, the massive growth that's gone on at the Stanford Shopping Center, and the massive growth that's gone on at the Stanford Hospital. So tell me, where are those people in their cars? How are they not producing traffic that are patients at the hospital, that are shoppers at the retail outlets at the shopping mall? It's clear that those numbers that are produced by them are producing the results that they want to see. So while I'm sure that they're doing much great good in reducing traffic, it's obviously not doing what they claim. Specific problems that I would bring up is the claim and the mitigations that should be addressed and required as a prerequisite is specific to the commuting. And the claim that there's no net new commuter trips, I think, is the claim that they use. And specifically, that there is an expectation that will be offset by increased Caltrain use. One of the women that spoke said, oh, well, there's other ways to deal with it. Well, the study itself specifically refers to mitigations that will be done through increased usage of Caltrain. We all know, and those of us who have been involved in studying this incredible problem with grade separation that's going to get exacerbated with the electrification of the train, we know that the train's already at capacity. What's going to happen is it's going to increase the volume of trains. Electrification is going to enable that. What's going to happen with that? With increased traffic that's going to be mitigated through use of the Caltrain corridor, is it's going to exacerbate traffic even worse. So what I would ask is, please make a prerequisite for approval of this GUP that Stanford has to fund mitigations, specifically, for example, increasing the capacity on Embarcadero, dealing with the fact that we have an Embarcadero road that has a huge choke point because it goes from 4 lanes all the way from 101 to Stanford and is choked for some reason I can't explain down to 3 lanes at Palo Alto High School, and to fund other grade separations, for example, the one where I live at Churchill Avenue. So please make mitigation funding requirements a prerequisite of approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Alan Kaiser, followed by Jim, I believe it's Miguel, and then Greg Welsh. Is Alan Kaiser still with us, or did he have to leave? All right. How about, is there a Jim Miguel? Miguel? How about Greg Welsh?
Thank you very much for hosting this meeting. I'm a little surprised, though, that the meeting occurred after the original deadline. It does give the community a sense that this was sort of being railroaded through until people stood up and took notice. But thank you for the move on the extension and hosting this evening's call for comments. I'm not here to criticize Stanford's record on traffic mitigation. I do believe that the steps that they've taken probably are leading and a beacon to other communities, but it's also equally apparent that while necessary, they are insufficient. As the largest landowner, developer, and employer in the Palo Alto area, the health of Stanford is tied directly to the health of the community that surrounds it. And that community is choking on traffic. You know, it's no coincidence that virtually everyone up here has commented upon that. It's gone way beyond being an inconvenience. It is now threatening the safety and the well-being of the citizenry. And while Stanford may claim that, wait a second, you know, at the edge of our property, we've taken care of the problem, it doesn't matter. The problem exists. If this leading institution, if this beacon for light and leadership doesn't do more than just sort of promise no new net trips, if it doesn't take a proactive role, just as once the predecessors of the leadership of Stanford took a proactive role in stepping off of the ivory tower and founding what ultimately became Silicon Valley, that people have come from around the world to study and emulate, that ivory tower is going to choke the community around it or stand by idly while it chokes itself. And the case studies of urban development in the future will be written about how Stanford may have been thinking globally, but didn't act locally. We need traffic relief now. We don't need it promised in vague and very complicated goals backed by an antiquated, incomplete, and dubious data collection method, all wrapped up in an easily gerrymandered system that has all sorts of credits that can be swapped. I mean, this reads exactly like a system that can be gamed. We're using pneumatic tubes to collect data at a few intersections, when the institutions, any one of us can pick up our phones and look at any number of real-time comprehensive data collection methods from companies that spun out of this august institution and see that the figures that are cited in the GUP are woefully out of touch with reality.
And Mr. Welch, speaking of outdated technology, I forgot to flick the outdated technology.
Then my timing is perfect. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. We have, I believe, 3 more speakers before we ask the folks from Stanford if they have anything they'd like to correct, and just a few parting announcements here. Our next speaker is Ahmad Sheikhol-Slami, Greg Schmidt, and Michael Clausen. Welcome, sir.
My name is Ahmad Sheikhol-Slami. Good evening. Supervisor Simitian and staff. I represent the Menlo City School District, Menlo Park City School District, as the Chief Business and Operations Officer. The Menlo Park City School District opposes any additional expansion of Stanford University beyond its current authorized limits that are not fully mitigated with appropriate housing and traffic mitigations. Any expansion of the university which results in additional employees and students must have full housing mitigation on the university's traditional boundary. Without this mitigation, any expansion will have an adverse impact on the Menlo Park City School District, which is a community-funded school district and does not receive any additional funding for new students. If adequate housing is not provided in the university boundary and Stanford rents or purchases homes for staff and/or students and utilizes its tax exemption status, all taxing entities, including the Menlo Park City School District, will lose critical funding. It is the belief of the Menlo Park City School District that the impacts to school facilities caused by Stanford's proposed development of residential and mixed-use property in formerly industrial, commercial, and institutional zoning districts can only be fully mitigated by ensuring that the additional residential load of Stanford's growth is accommodated on property that is already tax benefited under the welfare exemption, and not to impose additional residential needs on other lands in adjacent jurisdictions. In addition to the housing impact, the expansion project at the university will adversely impact traffic along major corridors through the school district, primarily traffic to Stanford University from 101 through Willow Road, from 280 through Sand Hill Road and increased traffic through El Camino Real will impact the Menlo Park City School District's safe routes to school efforts. Hazardous roadways and intersections will impact our safe routes to school efforts and impact the safety of our students who we are encouraging to walk and bike to school. The university must develop measures that fully mitigate any traffic level beyond currently unexpectable levels. These measures should not only include the traditional traffic mitigation measures, but should also include funding of crossing guards to assist schools and students in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your board members in your district for weighing in. We appreciate it. Greg Schmidt, to be followed by Michael Clausen.
Thank you very much for coming and spending an extra evening with us. The Stanford General Use Permit demands a specific county transportation commitment. The EIR openly admits that auto traffic in the area is congestion, and that even with intersection and freeway mitigation would leave any future traffic issues significant and unavoidable. Stanford is adding 2.3 million square feet of non-residential space on campus. There will be over 4,000 net new commute trips, many on Caltrain. Note that Stanford will be adding substantial numbers of new long-distance commuters from non-residential buildings on their other surrounding properties over the next 15 years. In addition to the 2.3 million on campus, there's 1.3 million square feet in the Stanford Medical Center, 0.8 million square feet in the Stanford Research Park, and 1.3 million in the new Redwood City Center. That's 5.7 million square feet altogether with 4,000 housing units. The EIR notes that the communities of Palo Alto and Menlo Park will be adding 4 times the number of new jobs to new housing during that period. Stanford's suggested traffic solution is to rely heavily on Caltrain. But the rail line is already at full capacity and will need substantial improvements to handle thousands of new customers and the infrastructure to avoid exacerbating the already troubled east-west connections. For this campus permit, the county can ask Stanford to contribute their fair share of the costs of the expansion of the rail infrastructure, or take on the burden themselves. In the past, the county has relied on the most regressive of local taxes, sales taxes, for their share. Be explicit in your decision on this EIR. Ask Stanford to pay the fair share of the costs of the rail infrastructure and make a clear pledge that the county will not come back asking for a regressive sales tax to cover the costs of the rail infrastructure improvement needed by Stanford. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Schmidt. Let me just verify one more time that Jim McGuall and Alan Kaiser are no longer prepared to hear and prepared to speak. If not, all right, then we can go to Michael Clausen, who is the proverbial last but not least speaker tonight. Mr. Clausen, welcome.
You stole my line. I was going to say that.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Supervisor Simitian, for organizing this meeting, and I'm pleased to be able to be present at it. I'm a long-term resident of this area, 45 years. I first moved here in 1972 to work at Stanford. My wife is currently employed at Stanford, and I am semi-retired, and we live in Menlo Park. I have generally positive feelings towards Stanford, but in this case, of the proposed general use permit, I think the university's proposed expansion is wildly excessive. Like many people here this evening, I've witnessed the massive decline in affordable housing and the huge increase in traffic that's accompanied the building and the high-tech booms on the peninsula. Obviously, other entities in addition to Stanford are responsible for this, but Stanford's sprawl is a real concern, and that's been mentioned by a number of speakers. I think that despite its best efforts to mitigate its impacts, Stanford's proposed expansion is bound to exacerbate these dire trends, thereby contributing to a further decline in the quality of life for the residents in this area. Let me get philosophical for a second here. The harsh reality is that we live on a finite planet with limited resources and limited space. In short, there are limits to growth. There are limits to growth both globally, regionally, and locally. There's a planning concept that's been in vogue for a number of years called smart growth. And I think that Stanford has been a good practitioner of that to quite a degree. But at some point, even the smartest growth becomes dumb and destructive. I'm concerned that Stanford's leaders, in their desire to make the university even greater, are confusing quantitative expansion with qualitative improvement. And I want to assert that the university can continue to become better without becoming bigger. So I suggest that Stanford do two things. Step back and re-examine its assumption that it needs to physically expand in order to qualitatively improve. I really encourage them to do that. I doubt they'll do it because I see there's a fixation on growth. We heard tonight, knowledge is continually expanding, but that does not mean that the university has to continually expand. They've been seduced by a growth imperative. In conclusion, I think an important distinction has to be made between knowledge and wisdom. In this case, it appears that Stanford is long on knowledge and short on wisdom. Now is the time for the university, the people at the university, to step back and plan for the future more wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And now let me turn to the folks at Stanford University. Ms. Palter, are you going to take the opportunity to offer a couple of comments here to try and clarify or correct? And before you do that, let me just ask a couple of quick questions, if I may. And if you don't have answers tonight, that's okay, because I know I'm being prompted by some of the things I heard, and I just want to make sure, and you can take notes and we can get back to it. We've been talking about 3,150 units of housing, and then sometimes the phrase beds or units. As I'm looking at your draft environmental impact report overview and summary, I'm seeing that it's 550 units of housing that are being proposed for faculty and staff, and 2,600 beds. Do I have those numbers right?
So the proposal is for 3,150 housing units. When those housing units support students, it's in the form of a bed. That's the technical definition of it. For the purposes of the environmental analysis and in our application, we made the assumption that it would be 550 faculty and staff units and 2,700 or 2,600 student beds. There is the ability to shift in those, but there can be no more than 550 faculty staff units without additional environmental analysis.
All right, well, I'll just turn to the staff and say as we go forward, I think some clarity and precision on that's going to be important. A bed is not what most people think of as a unit, and that's not to suggest that anybody's, it's been very clear in your document, so please let that be understood. But I think a bed is different than a unit. A unit of housing could have 3 bedrooms and accommodate 4 or 5 people. That's different than one bed that accommodates, well, I guess I shouldn't get into how many people are in a bed. That's probably a bad place to go. But I think you take my point, and that'll have some impact both on the housing calculations and on the traffic calculations. And I'll just ask planning staff to be mindful of that as we go forward and have this conversation. The other is the issue that was raised by the representative from the Menlo Park School District about the acquisition of housing units in Menlo Park, and I believe also in Palo Alto, by the university in an effort to provide housing for folks on the campus. And the fact that that obviously creates housing impacts for the larger community It also creates for the school districts, if they are locally funded, what we used to call basic aid school districts, some financial impacts. Do we have hard numbers on how many units in Menlo Park and Palo Alto, for example, have been acquired and where that's an issue?
Well, let me also clarify. I don't have hard numbers on the number of units, but when faculty own homes in Menlo Park and Palo Alto, those do not come off the tax rolls.
Right.
So there is no difference between a faculty member living in there or a non-Stanford person.
And I think what the representative from Menlo Park School District was talking about was the university actually acquiring housing in those jurisdictions, and then by virtue of its tax-exempt status, those properties coming off the tax rolls. So do we know how great
So that's still the same situation. If the university acquires the land first, the house, and it's then acquired by a long-term leaseholder, a faculty member purchases it, then it stays on the tax rolls.
All right, well, I'm gonna ask staff again to follow up on this particular issue, because either there's something I'm not understanding or there's widespread misunderstanding out in the community and even among folks who are crunching numbers at the Palo Alto Unified School District and the Menlo Park School District. But again, this is one where there clearly is an answer and we should just sort it out. So we'll deal with that some other time. Thanks. What I'm going to do now is finally give you that 5 minutes, and let me see if I can make the technology work here for me. I think we can. And again, limiting to clarifications or corrections tonight. Thank you so much. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My name for the record is Catherine Palter with Stanford University, and I want to thank everyone that has put their time and attention to trying to understand this proposal and that spent their precious evening coming out and sharing your thoughts. I don't have anything to, as you say, correct at this point. I'm very confident that the county's consultants will be able to provide clear and thoughtful responses to all the comments that we've received in these months. And so I just, at this time, just want to thank people, and we look forward to continuing this discussion as our consideration goes forward.
Thank you very much. And just thank you again to all who participated this evening. All of you took time out of your getting longer days. A reminder once again that written comments can be accepted up until 5 p.m. on Friday, February the 2nd. If you know how to get to the Planning Department's website, you can find it there. The URL is relatively long, so if it's easier, you can just go to my website, which is supervisorsimitian.org, and there's a Stanford link that you can find there. I think we also have some information on the table in the back. One comment just to assuage any concern, and that is things are likely to go quiet for a while because we are coming up on the end of the comment period. And when that happens, what that means is that the planning staff and the consultants who have been engaged for this effort go to work reviewing the comments and preparing responses. So if you're asking yourself, why am I not hearing anything? It's because folks are at work preparing, we hope, thoughtful responses to the comments that have been made during this comment period. Once the final EIR is ready, it will go to the Planning Commission with a staff report and conditions of approval that are recommended for consideration, and then ultimately it will come to our 5-member Board of Supervisors, as I've referenced. I do hope you will stay engaged as the process continues. My office and I will do everything we can to keep you informed about what's going on in the process, and if you have suggestions for how we can do that better, please don't hesitate to share them. We can't always do it all, but we're open to hearing your thoughts about how we can best stay in touch. I'm going to then say without objection, and I expect none whatsoever, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.